trend under the leadership of President Biden. As a result of the leadership from President Biden in partnership with House Democrats and Senate Democrats, America has emerged from the COVID-19 pandemic with the best economy of any country in the developed world. Wages are up and inflation is down. The stock market is up and gas prices are down. Economic growth is up. And border crossings that were illegally occurring are down 70% over the last several months. By any measure, things in this country relative to the economy and in every other area are moving in the right direction because President Biden and Democrats are about the business of governing. In fact, since the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, we've seen the rate of inflation decline dramatically. And it's been down now for 12 consecutive months. More than 13 million good-paying jobs have been created during President Biden's first term. That's a record in American history. And we're working hard to lower costs, as we did by lowering the cost of insulin from an average American family paying about $4,000 a year to now $35 a month because of the Inflation Reduction Act, because of President Biden's leadership, because of Democrats being committed to putting people over politics. We don't just say it, we mean it, and we are delivering in every possible way. And we're going to continue to fight for lower costs, for better paying jobs, for safer communities, for reproductive freedom, to defend democracy. And we are going to continue to build an economy from the middle out and the bottom up, as opposed to what extreme MAGA Republicans do, which is to focus on an economy from the top down, trickle-down economics. It's a failure, but the Republicans continue to double and triple down on this approach. You know what trickle-down economics means for everyday Americans? You may get a trickle, but you're guaranteed to stay down. That's what trickle-down economics is. But Bidenomics, middle-out economics, is focused on everyday Americans, on growing the middle class. And we have a track record to prove that we mean it. We're not just saying it. And we're going to continue to move the country forward in a positive direction. Questions?
Thank you, Mr. Leader. I have two questions. What do you make of Congressman Eli Crane referring to Black Americans serving in the military as colored people on the House floor?
It was an unfortunate statement. His words were taken down, and that was the appropriate thing to happen.
Second question here. So I spoke with CBC Chairman Stephen Horsford yesterday about the CBC's push to abolish the Jim Crow era blue slip process. Do you agree that Dick Durbin should do away with the process?
I agree that the Senate should do away with the process.
Good morning. Obviously, you're concerned about this rightward tilt in the defense bill here on the abortion issue and the transgender issue in the armed services. How do Democrats see that from a political standpoint? Obviously, Democrats were very successful in running on the Dobbs decision last year, but seeing a vote like that and seeing some of these efforts to get so-called woke policies out of the military, how do you then turn that around against the Republicans now?
First of all, it was shocking to me that the so-called moderates from New York and all across the country, like Anthony D'Esposito, Nick LaLota, Michael Lawler, Mark Molinaro, and of course, George Santos, among others, who do all that they can to project moderation. We're reasonable. We're not part of Team Extreme. But every single opportunity they have to vote with the American people, to vote with the women of this country, to vote with Team Reasonable, Team Normal, Team America, that's the House Democratic Caucus, every opportunity they have to show their reasonableness and distance themselves from the most extreme elements of their party, they fail to pass the test. Now, our view of the National Defense Authorization Act is that it is woefully irresponsible that extreme MAGA Republicans have hijacked a bipartisan bill that is essential to our national security and taken it over and weaponized it in order to jam their extreme right-wing ideology down the throats of the American people. That's why they've used the National Defense Authorization Act to continue their march toward a nationwide ban on abortion care and applying it to women service members and military spouses. That's outrageous. And it undermines our national security because we have an all-volunteer military. That means, as President Truman first recognized in 1948, when he desegregated the military, that in an increasingly diverse society, you have to have all hands on deck. Every corner of society should feel welcome in the military. We have to recruit from every segment of society in order to make sure that we're prepared in an increasingly dangerous world. And the good news is that every corner of American society, from communities of color, from women, from members of the LGBTQ plus community, have stepped up to say, we want to serve. We want to protect and defend all that America is about. That's why we have an incredibly diverse military, and it's good for the nation. But these extreme MAGA Republicans have decided that we want to attack women who serve in the military. We want to attack communities of color who are disproportionately overrepresented in military service. And we want to attack members of the LGBTQ plus community. This is incredibly irresponsible in terms of our national security. And that's why I'm going to strongly oppose this hyper-partisan, extreme right-wing effort to undermine our national security.
Thank you, Mr. Wicker. I think for your members,
I'll get to you.
for your members, the concerns might be deeper than what Mr. Crane said last night. We had a whole week where you had a Republican in the Senate trying to define white nationalism. And right there at that podium about a half hour ago, Mr. Good of Virginia said he doesn't know what white nationalism is or if it's in the military. What do you make of all this? This is people you serve with.
You have individuals in this country and across the Congress, including within the House Republican Conference, which clearly has been taken over by extreme MAGA Republicans, and individuals like George Santos and others who have outwardly expressed sympathy for white supremacy, that want to turn back the clock. But as Democrats, led by President Biden, we're going to continue to move the country forward, recognizing that our diversity in every possible way, our racial diversity, our ethnic diversity, our religious diversity, our socioeconomic diversity, our cultural diversity, is one of America's greatest strengths. It's an economic advantage for us in terms of our competitiveness on the global stage, and it's one of the reasons why we are leaders of the free world. And that should be embraced and welcomed, not undermined. But there are people who want to turn back the clock.
forgive me if you addressed this before I got here, and I know it's only July, but the appropriations markups, that process seems to be getting started, and I'm wondering how concerned you are that Republicans might not be holding up their end of the bargain on the spending levels that were set during the debt ceiling conversations, that we could find ourselves in shutdown territory come later this fall.
Extreme MAGA Republicans in the House are determined to shut down the government unless we as Democrats agree to their ransom demands, which include, but are not limited to, cutting Social Security, cutting Medicare, cutting Medicaid, cutting veterans benefits, cutting public education, cutting our ability to provide for the safety of the American people, including as part of their effort to defund the FBI and the Department of Justice. These are inherently unreasonable demands. But these are ransom demands that are being made. And the extreme MAGA Republicans have created a situation where basically they're telling the American people, unless you agree to undermining your health, your safety, your economic well-being, we're going to shut down the government. That's the track that we are on right now. And it's inherently irresponsible, but no one should be surprised because this is an extreme group of people who are in charge temporarily on the Republican side in the House of Representatives.
Thank you, Leader Jeffries. One, how do you square the likelihood there will be a conference to produce the final NDA? Are you willing to go into the next fiscal year without an NDA if the amendments Democrats voted against, like on DEI, make it into a conference version? And two, what's your reaction to Representatives Omar Bowman and Ocasio-Cortez saying they'll skip the Israeli president's address before a joint session of Congress next week?
We have to pass the National Defense Authorization Act in order to make sure that our military, the greatest military, in my view, in the history of the world, has everything that it needs to protect the safety and security of the American people. And the National Defense Authorization Act, historically, is a bipartisan legislative effort that has now been hijacked by extreme MAGA Republicans who want to wage their so-called culture war against the men and women of the United States military. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. And the only explanation for it is that they are so obsessed with jamming their extreme right-wing ideology down the throats of the American people that extreme MAGA Republicans are willing to even detonate the ability of our military to do what it needs to do to keep us safe. And so, this is a malignant charade that is taking place on the floor of the House of Representatives right now. But we, as Democrats, look forward to working with President Biden, Senate Democrats, and Senate Republicans to do the responsible thing by the end of this fiscal year and pass a responsible National Defense Authorization Act. In terms of your second question, President Bougie Herzog has been a force for good in Israeli society. And because Israel is such an important part of the Middle East, because we have such a special relationship with Israel, and because Israel is an important part of the global community, the fact that President Herzog has been such a force for good in Israeli society, as has his family, his father and his grandfather, his mother and his grandmother, his entire family, including his brother, then I look forward to welcoming him with open arms when he comes to speak before Congress next Wednesday.
But how do you feel about those members skipping the address? I mean, you in the Democrats.
Individual members make individual decisions, but I can tell you that I expect there will be an incredibly robust turnout and participation amongst House Democrats on Wednesday.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leader Jeffries. One of the amendments deals with the DoD subsidizing transgender care. Why do you think that needs to be something the DoD subsidizes? What's your justification for that versus it being something that's an elective surgery?
We have to take a step back and look at the totality of the United States military and its readiness. And I believe that the Department of Defense has made the appropriate decision in its totality that every single segment of society should be welcomed if you are willing to put your life on the line to serve the United States of America in uniform and protect and defend our freedoms abroad in an increasingly dangerous world. That means everyone, white, black, Latino, Asian, Native American, men, women, gay, straight, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, secular, religious, everyone should be welcomed in a diverse society, particularly when they are willing to serve. That's why it's so irresponsible from a national security standpoint that extreme MAGA Republicans have said, we're going to attack members of the LGBTQ plus community. We're going to attack communities of color. We're going to ban books. We're going to continue bullying people in the transgender community. And most viciously, we are going to undermine a woman's freedom to make her own reproductive health care decisions. Military women and military spouses, that's extraordinary that they've politicized this bill in such a cancerous way. As House Democrats, we are going to cut out the cancer that the extreme MAGA Republicans have put in the National Defense Authorization Act, no matter what it takes. And we're going to partner with Senate Republicans and Senate Democrats to get a responsible National Defense Authorization Act. Heather?
Hey, sir. Two questions. One, given
Everybody's got two questions today.
gotta get them in, you know. One, given the votes we've seen this week and what happened in New York with the maps, how confident are you that Democrats are going to take back the House next year? Two, how do you square your attacks against these members when you had a member of your own caucus vote in favor of the same amendment?
Well, we can agree to disagree within our caucus. The overwhelming majority of people on every issue of reproductive freedom over the last several Congresses have clearly expressed their positions as it relates to standing on the side of women and reproductive freedom. And we can take the issue of redistricting as separate from what is happening in terms of the votes that members of the New York delegation may be casting, which I am personally connected to. Because notwithstanding whatever position I have the honor of holding here in Washington, I'm a representative of the great state of New York. And I know what the values of New Yorkers are as it relates to reproductive freedom. We support a woman's freedom to make her own reproductive health care decisions. So I'm personally offended for the people that I represent from the 8th Congressional District who serve in the United States military. And if they serve at a base in New York, then yes, they'll have the ability to make their own reproductive health care decisions. But if members from the 8th Congressional District are stationed in Texas or in Florida or in Iowa, which is now on its way toward a 6-week abortion ban, again, further evidence that what the extreme MAGA Republicans want to do is impose a nationwide ban on abortion care. It's not hyperbole, it's reality. And so the fact that you've got members from the New York delegation voting in a way that is inconsistent with the reproductive freedom of the people that I represent and the women in America who are serving in uniform, yes, I have a problem with that. But more importantly, so does the majority of the American people. In terms of redistricting, this is pretty simple. The current congressional lines in New York were drawn by an unelected, out-of-state special master who was handpicked by an extreme right-wing judge from Steuben County, which is located closer to Cleveland, Pittsburgh, and Toronto than it is New York City, Long Island, Westchester, Rockland, or the Hudson Valley communities. And so it was a flawed process that was unacceptable, undemocratic, and unconscionable. And the courts correctly concluded by sending the ability for the congressional lines to be drawn for the balance of the decade back to the Independent Redistricting Commission. New Yorkers should draw congressional lines for New Yorkers. It's a pretty simple concept that the overwhelming majority of the people of New York support. And that's what the Independent Redistricting Commission now has the ability to do for the good and well-being of our state.
Leader Jeffries, Basil Drummond, Next Star. One question for you today. I just want to get your thoughts on.
You get the first question next week.
So I want to ask you about one of the provisions that Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez and Congressman Dan Crenshaw had put through for the NDAA, which is allowing for the study of using psychedelics in order to treat those who are suffering from PTSD. Want to get your thoughts on this. Is this something that you think should be included, considering NIH has even come out stating that this is something that could have a positive effect on veterans?
Yeah, this has been an issue that has been raised consistently by different members, including Representative Ocasio-Cortez, and I think that we should all just let the science drive the decisions as we move forward, both in terms of what happens within the context of the United States military and throughout our society.
Last question.
Okay, thanks. We'll do the last. We'll do the last two. Did we get to you?
Me, yes.
Okay, yes.
Thank you.
Sorry, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Leader. I know you've stated multiple times you're vehemently opposed to the NDAA in its current form, but are you expecting some of your members to break with the caucus, and are you okay with that? And if the NDAA does pass in its current form, is your best hope that this will be fixed in the Senate when the two versions are reconciled? Some of these measures will be stripped out?
Yeah, it's my expectation that the overwhelming majority of the House Democratic Caucus will vote against this extreme, reckless, radical version of the National Defense Authorization Act because it's irresponsible. And it doesn't lift up the national security of the American people. It undermines it in a poisonous and cancerous way by undermining the ability of the United States military to have an armed services that is fully reflective of our society and to meet the demands in terms of personnel in an increasingly fraught global community.
Thank you. Leader Schumer on the other side said that he's going to be putting forward a measure as part of the NDAA that would declassify Pentagon reports about UAPs or UFOs. As somebody who is also a member of the Gang of Eight, who I imagine you might have gotten a briefing or two about these things, what's your take on that? Do you think the American public should be seeing what the Pentagon is seeing about these types of reports?
Yeah, I've not participated in any Gang of Eight briefings this year related to the subject of unidentified flying objects, but I do support transparency, and to the extent there's information that can be put into the public domain that is enlightening one way or the other, and perhaps is able to dismiss some of the conspiracy theories that exist increasingly in our society, then that is certainly something that I support. Thank you.
Dismiss or confirm?
See, you only had one question, Gary.
Are you gonna put a photo spot up in Statuary Hall for the minority leader, like the speaker did?
What's that?
The speaker put a.
He did a rope line.
Rope line
A
yesterday.
rope line with a photo op.
For
Where tourists
tourists.
could take selfies. Are you going to do that as well?
I'm a humble public servant.
Thank you, Leader Jeffries.
Thank you.
Kara always getting in the last word.